Imagine this. It's 1915, deep in the heart of the Ottoman Empire, in a dusty, sun-scorched region called Mesopotamia. This is the story of one of the most humiliating defeats in British military history. A disaster that unfolded over 147 days of starvation, desperation, and ultimately, surrender. This is the story of the Siege of Kut al Amara. So, how did a powerful British Indian force end up trapped in a small, remote town on the banks of the Tigris River? Well, it all started with a string of successes. The British Empire, wanting to protect its vital oil interests in Persia and expand its influence, sent the Indian Expeditionary Force, D, mostly composed of soldiers from British India, into Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq. Led by Major-General Charles Townshend, these troops initially did incredibly well. They pushed up the Tigris River, capturing key towns like Basra and Amara. They were professional, well-drilled, and they seemed unstoppable. With each victory, confidence in London and Delhi grew. The next logical step, it seemed, was to capture the ultimate prize, Baghdad. Townshend, an ambitious and somewhat theatrical commander, was convinced he could take the city. Despite his supply lines being stretched dangerously thin, and his men being exhausted after months of campaigning in a harsh climate. The order came down to advance. The lure of Baghdad was just too strong to resist. In November 1915, Townshend's force, now known as the 6th Puna Division, met a well-prepared Ottoman army at a place called Ctesiphon, just south of Baghdad. The battle was a bloody stalemate. The British Indian troops fought bravely and inflicted heavy casualties, but they took a beating themselves. With thousands of wounded and supplies running critically low, Townshend realized he couldn't hold his position, let alone take Baghdad. He had no choice but to retreat. He fell back down the Tigris River to a U-shaped bend in the river, where the small town of Kut al Amara was located. Here, Townshend made a fateful decision. Instead of continuing his retreat all the way back to the main British base at Basra, he decided to dig in and wait for reinforcements. He believed Kut was a strong defensive position, and that relief would arrive within a month or two. He told his superiors he had enough supplies to hold out. This was a catastrophic miscalculation. The Ottoman army, now under the command of a shrewd German general, Colmar von der Goltz, quickly surrounded Kut. They dug trenches, set up artillery, and sealed off the town completely. The siege had begun. Inside Kut were about 13,000 soldiers and several thousand local civilians. At first, spirits were relatively high. Townshend was confident, and the men trusted their commander. They believed help was just around the corner. But as the weeks turned into months, that optimism began to fade. The reality of their situation became terrifyingly clear. Food was the biggest problem. Rations were cut, then cut again, and then cut again. They started by eating their transport animals, mules, horses, anything they could find. The once proud cavalrymen had to watch as their mounts were led away to be slaughtered for meat. Soon, even that ran out. The men were reduced to eating anything they could find: cats, dogs, birds, even weeds and grass. Starvation set in, and with it came diseases like scurvy, dysentery, and beriberi. The hospital, a scene of unimaginable suffering, was overflowing with sick and starving men. Outside the besieged town, the British were desperately trying to break through. They launched a series of frantic and poorly coordinated relief attempts. These battles, fought in atrocious weather, freezing rain, and thick mud, were some of the bloodiest of the Mesopotamian campaign. The relief force, made up of newly arrived and often inexperienced troops, threw themselves against the strong Ottoman defensive lines again and again. Places with names like Sheikh, Saad, the Wadi, and Hana became synonymous with slaughter. Thousands of men were killed and wounded for just a few yards of ground. The Ottomans dug into their trenches, fought back with fierce determination. From inside Kut, the defenders could hear the thunder of the guns from the relief battles, a constant, agonizing reminder that help was so close, yet so far away. The hope that each barrage brought was quickly extinguished as the sounds of battle faded, and they realized another attempt had failed. The British even tried to supply the town from the air, one of the first major attempts at aerial resupply in history. But the planes were primitive, their carrying capacity was tiny, and much of what they dropped landed either in the river or in Ottoman territory. A more dramatic attempt was made with a supply ship called the Julnar. In a daring nighttime mission, it tried to run the gauntlet of Ottoman guns to reach the town. It was a suicide mission. The ship was hit, ran aground, and its crew was killed or captured. It was the final, desperate gamble, and it had failed. By the end of April 1916, the situation inside Kut was hopeless. The men were skeletal figures, too weak to even stand. Their uniforms were in tatters. Ammunition was almost gone, but the real enemy was starvation. There was simply no food left. General Townshend, seeing his men dying around him, knew he had no other option. After 147 days under siege, he sent a message to the Ottoman commander to discuss terms of surrender. On April 29, 1916, the unthinkable happened. Over 13,000 British and Indian soldiers laid down their arms and surrendered. It was the largest single surrender of British-led troops between the American Revolution and the fall of Singapore in World War II. For the soldiers who had endured so much, the ordeal was far from over. What followed was a horror of a different kind. The death march. The prisoners, already weak from starvation and disease, were forced to march hundreds of miles north to prison camps in Anatolia. They were given little food or water and were brutalized by their guards. Many collapsed and died by the side of the road. Of the roughly 13,000 who surrendered at Kut, nearly 5,000 died in captivity from disease, starvation, or mistreatment. It was an appalling tragedy, especially for the Indian soldiers, who suffered disproportionately. The fall of Kut was a massive blow to British prestige, and a huge propaganda victory for the Ottoman Empire. It sent shockwaves through London and the rest of the empire. A commission was set up to investigate the disaster, which condemned the entire campaign as a poorly planned and executed mess, highlighting the failures of leadership from the top down. But the story of Kut is not just one of failure. It's also a story of incredible endurance and courage. The soldiers who defended the town and those who tried to relieve it fought with immense bravery in some of the worst conditions imaginable. Their sacrifice, though ending in defeat, is a powerful and sobering chapter in the history of the First World War. It serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of ambition, miscalculation, and the brutal realities of war. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into forgotten history. See you in the next video.